Tim, we've got a leadership candidate in the studio to have a cup of tea with us and answer a series of interrogations
I'm
from us
so
both.
excited. It's Rob Jenrick,
Who you went to university
who
with.
I was at university with, but he won't remember me because he was far cooler than me.
Was he? Don't tell me you weren't cool. I love
And
it.
I don't remember anything.
Is Jenrick high on this cool scale? I mean, really?
I think among Tories at Cambridge in the early 2000s, he might have been a 7.
Wow.
Yeah, I think
what
he
would
was
you have
considered
been
pretty cool.
out of 10, out of interest?
Well, I was a Marxist. I was on demonstrations.
Oh, yeah, that was when you were a
I was
lefty.
briefly living in a squat.
So he's been on a journey. You've been on a journey.
I've been on a very long journey via a shower and a shave.
All right, so put your rucksack on because we're all going on a journey today on the Daily Tea. So Robert Jenrick, Tory leadership candidate, joins us in the Daily Tea studio. Welcome. You've seen the teapot here. You said, is this real or is it a prop? It's real.
Well, I'm very pleased. I'd like to have a cup of tea, please.
Great. And the first question we always ask is, how do you take your tea?
Well, I'll have white with a bit of sugar, please.
Do you want sugar? Do we actually have sugar?
Oh
no!
my
Oh,
God.
sorry,
No
my
one's
sweet
ever
tooth
asked for
has
that
Can
stopped you.
someone get some sugar immediately? Let me pour that in.
Okay.
And Yorkshire tea, please.
And it has to be Yorkshire,
Well,
right?
I don't know if it is Yorkshire.
No, it
Right.
doesn't look
It's
like
probably
it, does it?
Twinings, knowing the
No,
Telegraph.
it's very.
Do you know what? It is
I
Twinings.
wouldn't
It is-
expect
it is
anything less.
Twinings.
It's Twinings English breakfast.
Very nice.
We shall put some sugar in that momentarily. There we are. That's strong enough.
That is great. Thank you very much.
Proper generous. Do you want one, Tim?
No,
Oh,
I'm all
you've
right.
got
I've got
on the go.
coffee. And while you're doing that, shall I ask the big
Yes,
historic?
please.
Okay. And the other question we always ask people is, who is your ideal companion to have tea with from history,
Oh,
Alive
from
or dead?
history.
alive or dead?
Who would you
Ooh.
like to have a cup of tea with?
Who would have been a good person to have a cup of tea with? Maybe someone like Queen Victoria. She's the ultimate person to have had.
She liked tea.
She loved tea,
Yes.
and she basically invented afternoon tea, didn't she?
Yeah, that's actually a good answer because it's tea based.
Well, a bit miserable though, wasn't she, for
Oh,
huge
oh,
swathes
I
of
think
her
that's
life?
unfair.
Well,
only
am I
only
being
in
horrible?
I
later
want to have
life.
tea with her during the grieving
Yeah,
Post-Albert.
I think
period.
early stage Queen Victoria.
I would
afternoon
specify.
tea.
Young Victoria.
Exactly, young
Yeah.
Yeah,
Victoria.
I'd specify not in mourning, Victoria.
Full of
Yeah.
ideas.
It's all taken a turn I wasn't expecting.
I know.
Very quickly.
That's the thing about this podcast. It takes some sudden turns and twists. We will go through a potted history of your life, Robert Jenrick, before we get into the meat and bones of this interview. You were born in Wolverhampton. You're 42. You were privately educated at Wolverhampton Grammar School. You read history at St John's College, Cambridge. Then you went to the University of Pennsylvania, very Rishi Sunak, to do political science. You trained as a solicitor. You were elected as the MP for Newark in 2014. That was after a by-election following Patrick Mercer's resignation. You beat UKIP, Roger Helmer, to take the crown in Newark. Your first big job, as in Secretary of State job, was under Boris Johnson, housing communities. What was it called in those days?
Housing, community, and local government, as it is again now.
Oh, yes, because they took the levelling up
They've
part out of
scrapped
it.
levelling up progressively.
You were Health Minister under Liz Truss, Immigration Minister under Rishi Sunak. You resigned in December 2023, saying that the Rwanda plan didn't go far enough. Crucially, before Suella Braverman was sacked, resigned. You're married and you have...
It was just after.
Was it just
Suella
after?
left. It
Oh,
was,
she
yeah, it was-
went first.
It was a month later.
In the whole... Yeah, this is like the David Davis, Boris Johnson race to resign.
Yeah.
And you're married with 3 daughters.
And you have 2 dogs.
That's right.
And what are the dogs?
There's a cockapoo
Right.
called Toffee, and there's a little Maltese, which I'm ashamed to say is called Shakespeare, because it came from a breeder in Stratford-upon-Avon. That was not my decision.
Was
that was
nothing
my
wrong with
daughter's
calling a
decision.
dog
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare?
Well,
That's
you
delightful.
try calling that name in the park.
Yes.
Not
Notice
great-
I asked
not
nothing
great
about
reaction.
the kids. I just go straight for what are the dogs.
I know, you're so
I
dog
assume the
obsessed.
kids have names as
Yeah,
well.
forget the kids. We don't like naming children for privacy reasons, but we can name dogs. Now, before we get... Ooh, we do have sugar. Bring the sugar in, please. Let's sweeten Robert Jenrick up before we interrogate him fully as he approaches this marathon of a leadership race. There we are.
Thank you, thank you. That's very
Oh,
kind.
mixture of brown and white. He's putting brown in,
It's-
ladies and
it's
gentlemen.
not good for my
There we are.
waistline, but
Let's
thank
just
you.
see how many he puts in, Tim, because that's a marker of a man, isn't it? If he puts in 16
One.
sugars,
It's one.
Just one.
You've shamed me.
just the one, Mrs.
And because
Wembley.
we're watching. Just watching it, it's half sugar normally, isn't it?
Now, we're being quite light-hearted, but the initial question we do want to ask you about, because we're recording this with the threat of yet more violence on the streets of Britain. The police have been informed of 30 different hotspots that could be prone to riots later. There's been a debate that we discussed yesterday, Tim, with regard to two-tier policing. We analysed Elon Musk's comments, and he has called the Prime Minister two-tier Keir. And we thought we'd ask you about Birmingham, because it's obviously your neck of the woods. And this was quite interesting. So there's this clip of West Midlands Superintendent Emlyn Richards, who was speaking to Sky News, which seemed to indicate or give rise to fears that there may be two-tier policing in this country.
We have really strong business and community relations, and because we were aware through intelligence that there was a potential protest through that misinformation yesterday, we had the opportunity to meet with community leaders, with business leaders prior to that event to kind of understand the style of policing that we needed to deliver during the course of that operation. So we knew that there was going to be a large amount of people out on that counter-protest. We knew who the vast majority of those people were. We'd had conversations in terms of what that was likely to look like. And so our policing response was commensurate to that intelligence and the information that we'd held with our partners and communities prior to that event taking place.
Even given there were so many of them clearly armed, I mean, would you do the same if it was an EDL type situation?
So we've policed in response to the intelligence that we received at that moment in time. What I would say is that the vast majority of people that attended that protest yesterday did so law-abidingly, and they did it with the right intentions. There were just a small minority of people that attended there and were intent on causing either criminality, disorder or fear within our communities. What we saw was a response from our communities where they were trying to kind of make sure that that was policed within themselves as well, and trying to deter people from taking part in that disorder. And as a result, we've been able to go on, gather that evidence, gather that information. We have made arrests. Well, we've made an arrest this afternoon. We continue to try and make arrests in terms of those people that were involved in those disorders yesterday.
What do you make of that?
Well, look, I think the police have got a very difficult job right now, and politicians, political leaders like myself shouldn't be doing anything to make that harder. We should be backing them to the hilt. But I have been critical in the past of the police in the way in which they have addressed public order challenges like the protests after October the 7th. And they must be robustly enforcing the law without fear or favour. I don't want them to be squeamish or selective in the way in which they do that. I am concerned by the remarks of West Midlands Police, particularly the suggestion that some communities should police themselves. That isn't right. Of course, the police.
Is he saying that though, or is he saying we have to rely upon intelligence, we have to respond to what we believe is going to happen, and we are reassured this would not be what it turned into, and that's why the police presence wasn't so great?
Well, of course, the police have to act on intelligence, and we are discussing this with only partial information. But I don't think that policing should be dictated by community leaders. We shouldn't be leaving communities to police themselves. The police should be on our streets right now in the affected communities, keeping the public safe. And that did not appear to happen in that instance, because we've seen that footage of sectarian gangs on the street, in some cases brandishing weapons, intimidating a female journalist live on television. We've heard reports of shopkeepers and residents having to cower in their shops and homes. That something has gone wrong in that instance, and once this violence has been quelled, we will need to think carefully about how public order issues like this are handled in the future.
Can we just grasp the nettle on this? Because we keep on talking about making comparisons between October the 7th and then these riots, and indeed Hare Hills has been discussed in the past. Are we saying that we think that the police in this country are more light touch with Muslim protesters than white working class ones?
Well, I don't think we have evidence of that, and each of these instances are different. Some were spontaneous and inevitably more difficult to police. Some are highly coordinated and therefore do warrant an altogether different police response. But what the public want to see from the police is the law being enforced robustly and equally, regardless of the group that is involved. And the same is true for our politicians and political leaders. I've been very clear that we should be calling out violence wherever it is from, wherever we see it. I think that the actions of the far-right groups are a disgrace. Racist ambushes of communities, attacks on a mosque, that is a disgrace. That is anti-British behaviour. I also think that the retaliatory protests and riots by sectarian groups, smaller in number, are equally disgraceful. And it concerns me that some of our political leaders, the Prime Minister in particular, appear to be scared of saying so. That is not the way to unite the country and to meet this moment of national crisis and reassure the public that violence of any kind will be called out and treated with equal measure.
In your opinion, why might politicians or police officers be wary of handling ethnic minority communities in a different way from white working class communities?
Well, I think in some cases, and looking back in particular on the response to October the 7th, but mainly because we've had longer to think about that, we know more of the facts as to how that was policed. I think sometimes the police are more concerned about community relations than they are about robust and fair enforcement of the law. And in that instance, I was worried, as others were too, that the police were not taking the kind of zero tolerance approach to extremism that I want to see. And as I say, that would be extremism of any kind, because they were concerned about the impact on certain communities. That's wrong.
Right. So when you say community relations, I want to ask a thick question here. What does that mean in policing terms? What is it the police are worried about undermining?
Well, I think sometimes the police prize their relationships with particular communities and maintaining
above law and order,
above robustly enforcing the law.
Right.
The job of the police, of course, is to manage communities, to dial down tensions. But where you see extremism, where you see violence of any kind, the police should be tackling that. Individuals should be being arrested, regardless of who they are and from what community they come from.
Do you think there's a legacy from 2020 and Bristol, BLM, and all the protests that have come from then? Do you think there is a legacy of being light touch on demonstrations and protests that turned nasty or did damage? The legacy is that people look at that and think, what we do now is riot. It's okay to riot. I can riot and get away with it.
Well, I think disorder breeds disorder.
Yeah,
that's a point that I've made consistently, and we see that. You see it with more minor incidents, and you see it now with these very serious ones on the streets today. If the police don't get a grip quickly, then it gives license to other people to act in the same way, and it gives a sense of impunity that you can say things on the streets that are intimidatory, that you can, as we saw after October 7th, call for jihad or just off Oxford Street, and that these things, which are fundamentally anti-British and we shouldn't be seeing on our streets, that these are somehow acceptable or are being tolerated. And so what I want to see is the police adopt a very robust attitude, regardless of who is doing these and in which part of the country. That, I think, is what the public are demanding.
What some people might say, listening to you, is that you and your rhetoric has contributed to the disorder. By talking about immigration and asylum in the way that the Conservatives and centre-right people have done for so long, you have said things which have whipped up anger against ethnic minorities, and that's what's now being played out in the streets. Is there any part of you that at all worries that you may have in some small way contributed to the sense of social tension which has erupted in the last week?
No, in fact, I think the opposite is true. I think if political leaders do not engage with issues that the public are concerned about, of course choose their language with care and do so in a way which seeks to handle these issues sensitively. But if parties of the centre-right or the centre-left and elected politicians in our country do not engage with questions of immigration or integration, then precisely the opposite of what you argue will happen. It will open up space for parties on the extreme, and then you will see whether it's Islamist extremists or far-right extremists having the opportunity to make a case because people will feel they're being ignored. And so it is incumbent on politicians like myself to do that. And it's very important that we don't tar the millions of people in our country who care about these issues, legitimate issues, with the same brush as the thugs, the morons, the criminals who are out on the streets causing disorder, rioting, smashing up shops, brawling with the police. It is entirely separate, and it's perfectly legitimate for people across the country to be concerned about mass migration and its consequences. And if we mustn't try to close down artificially that debate, because it will simply create new problems for us.
Clearly, millions have arrived here since 1997. I think the figure is 5.9 million since 1997, which is more than 100 times those that arrived pre-1997. So we've seen huge societal change. People are here now, not just first generation, but second, third, and beyond. And there's all of this talk about integration. How do you get communities to integrate better? And what is the solution to people's concerns about mass migration, both legal and illegal?
Well, I think you're right that the period we've been living through for my adult lifetime is a completely unique one in our history. In the 25 years prior to 1997, net migration was 59,000. And so we are living in a period of absolutely exceptional levels of immigration to our country, perfectly legally. But this is placing huge pressure on housing. It's making it harder for young people to get on the housing ladder, on access to public services. And it is, I think, contributing to diminishing public trust and to weakening community cohesion and unity. That's the reason why I've argued for a fundamentally different approach, one where we not just reduce the numbers coming into our country modestly, but we bring them right down to at least the tens of thousands.
So you would put a cap on
legal
migration?
I've advocated a legally binding cap set by Parliament so the public can have confidence that this is actually going to happen and that we will break that cycle of broken promises by parties of all political persuasions for many years.
OK, but how do you better integrate the people that are already here if that is a problem in the towns and cities of Great Britain?
Well, firstly, you have to reduce the number coming in because it's impossible to successfully integrate 1.2 million people per year. But the people who are already here, I think we have to confront the fact that there are segregated communities in our country, not all over the country, but in certain places, and that is unhelpful to integration. And so we've got to try to build more integrated communities. We've been housing, for example, illegal migrants, often in particular places, in highly concentrated communities, which has flared up into real tensions. And I don't want to see that. We need to be having people spread more evenly. We need to be encouraging those people to integrate more. We need a proper programme to ensure that where there is extremism, it is tackled head on. That means that the police vigorously enforce the law where they see extremism that is illegal. It means programs like Prevent being completely reformed, and we commissioned William Shawcross to do a very comprehensive review of that. I hope that the new Labour government will implement that. I suspect they won't because they've been highly critical of Prevent in the past. When I was Immigration Minister, I took the view that if people were anti-British in their sentiment, whether that's anti-Semitic or far-right or anything else that falls below the standards we expect in this country, we should be looking to revoke their visas and remove them from the country. And we need to be working very closely with schools, with local councils, with institutions of all kinds to bear down on people who are propagating anti-British values, make it more difficult to successfully integrate people into our communities. But I don't pretend that this is easy. It is not plain sailing. And that is why you have to reduce the number of people coming into countries, because that fundamentally is the problem. You just can't integrate such large numbers of people in such a short period, particularly when it is unplanned, as it has been in recent years.
But the counter sort of stop the boats narrative is when people get here and we process their asylum claims, the majority of them are allowed to remain. Therefore, they must have a right to come here, seek asylum and live in the UK. Would you be looking to reducing the amount of people that are allowed to come here as asylum seekers, as well as reducing legal migration and indeed cracking down on illegal immigrants?
Yes, I don't want to encourage people to be coming here illegally. I think that's highly dangerous as you know, around half of them are coming across on small boats, risking their lives. It's fueling a trail of human misery, which I've seen because I've tracked it across Europe. I've been to North Africa. I've looked in great detail at the human traffickers and people smuggling gangs. And so we think we have to break that cycle once and for all.
Sure.
That's why I advocated a very robust version of the Rwanda policy. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister at the time didn't take up my proposals and those that were backed by over 60 Conservative members of Parliament when I laid amendments to the Rwanda bill
But
at
on
the turn of the
asylum,
year.
are we granting too many people asylum to this country?
Well, our asylum grant rates are much higher than comparable countries in Europe. And most of the asylum seekers that we are receiving have passed through multiple safe countries. I don't think that's sensible. We should be discouraging people from making those dangerous journeys if they're already in a place of safety, like France or Germany or Belgium. And we should be focusing our efforts as a country on supporting people to come here directly from conflict zones. I think we are a big-hearted country. I want us to be helping people in their hour of need. But the best way in which we do that is by helping people on focused schemes like the ones we've had from Hong Kong, Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan in the recent past, not helping young men who are already in a place of safety, like France, to come to the UK and build a new life here. I think there is a better way in which the UK can live up to its obligations in the world.
Quick yes or no answer. Is Elon Musk right to call Keir Starmer two-tier Keir?
Look, I'm not going to get into nicknames about the Prime Minister.
But is he generally right?
No, I don't trade in nicknames about the PM or anybody else.
Right, but is that an accurate description of
I don't think that's
the
a sensible.
policy?
I don't think that's a sensible thing for me to engage in. What I do think is that the Prime Minister is running scared on this debate and is not calling out in equal measure violence and disorder by those on the far right
Yes.
and those in sectarian gangs.
Yes or no?
That
I'll
is
never get
wrong.
it, but yes or no. Should Elon Musk have allowed Tommy Robinson onto Twitter?
Well, I don't want Twitter to become, the home for far-right activity and disinformation, and we have now robust laws in place through the Online Safety Act, and it's for the government, for authorities here in the UK, to be using those laws to crack down on individuals or groups, whoever they might be, who are spreading those.
Right, okay.
Can we talk about the journey that you have been on as a Conservative? If you agree it has been a journey, we just noted that Priti Patel, your leadership rival, went on GB News last night, and she appeared to take what appeared to be perhaps a swipe at you. I don't know whether it was aimed at you, but she said, I've been consistent in my views. I'm not a politician who's had to go on a journey to rediscover myself or my views. And I think that is intended to reflect the fact that you voted for Remain and now you're describing yourself as a Eurosceptic. I think previously you'd been ambivalent about the idea of leaving the ECHR. Now you're advocating it. That you seem to have been on a bit of journey from having been nicknamed, probably quite cruelly, Robert Jenrick, to now being quite right-wing. And is it fair to say you've been on a journey and you want to take the party on that journey, or is that a mischaracterisation?
Well, I'll be honest with you. For much of my time in politics, as a Member of Parliament now for 10 years, I did take the view that our political system broadly worked. And over time, particularly in the last few years, I have come to the view that our politics is broken. It's fundamentally broken and is actually contributing to our national decline. I saw that when I was Community Secretary, where I saw during the pandemic the British state being simultaneously overbearing but also powerless. I saw it when I was Housing Secretary, when we had a planning system that meant we literally couldn't build critical energy or transport infrastructure, even when it was overwhelmingly in the national interest. But it was my time at the Home Office which brought that home to me most powerfully, where I saw a British state that simply couldn't perform its most basic duty, securing our border, keeping the public safe, and an economic model whereby foreign labour imported into this country was undercutting the wages of British workers, it was exacerbating the housing crisis, and it was creating some of the community tensions that we now see flaring up all over our country. And so I have, if you want to call it a journey, you can call it that, but I have come to a conclusion that our politics isn't working and we need to do something fundamentally different. That is one of the reasons I'm standing to be leader of the Conservative Party, because I want to take the country in a different direction where we seize the opportunities that we have, that we speak hard truths about the serious challenges that we're facing, like many other Western countries today, and we actually set out to deliver for the public in a way that the last Conservative government didn't, in a way that I do not believe this new Labour government will do, because I think they have too many delusions, and too many other governments of all colours across the West are simply failing to do. So, yes, I'm happy to be described as somebody whose views have evolved as our politics has changed. But what I want to, I think, in fact, uniquely amongst those standing for leadership, is to have serious answers to the serious challenges facing this country.
But doesn't Priti Patel and indeed Kemi Badenoch speak the same language? Suella Braverman spoke the same language that you're speaking now. She's kind of blown up her campaign maybe because some of her supporters like John Hayes and others in the Common Sense group have reverted to you. So the question is, if you're going to pick a candidate on the right, why you and not Priti Patel and Kemi Badenoch, who seem to have been more consistent in what they're saying?
Well, look, I think you ride your own horse. I'm not going to go around criticising others. That's not my way. I have been very clear on migration. The decisions that were taken immediately after the Brexit referendum by the ministers in place at the time were amongst the worst decisions I have seen in my lifetime. They led to an enormous explosion in migration to this country. They are things that directly led to millions of people leaving the Conservative Party to go and vote Reform or to not vote at all because they were so angry and frustrated by this party. I was the only person, frankly, who was willing to take a stand on that issue. When I felt that I could no longer extract the reforms that were necessary, either on legal or illegal migration, I chose to resign because I, for one, was not willing to be just another minister who made and broke promises on immigration. Nobody else in the last cabinet was willing to do that. Some saw the iceberg ahead of us, but they were willing to continue to stay on that ship.
You're talking about Suella there?
I think, well, no, Suella had left the government at that point, but I was the only person who was willing to take that stand.
She says she was sacked rather than resigned, which is that's where the difference lies, isn't it?
Sure.
She was forced out. You volunteered.
She
to
also
go.
says that you were put into the Home Office to keep an eye on her.
Well, look, I'm not going to criticise Suella. Suella and I have been friends for 20 years now, and we worked very well together at the Home Office. We were both seized by the scale of the challenge. When we walked into the Home Office...
That's not true.
It was a
Just to check,
department
that's not true. You weren't put in to be the...
no, of course not. You have to ask the Prime Minister what his motivations were. But
former Prime Minister.
The former Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But in my time in the Home Office, we worked closely together to try and fix the problems that we found, which were very profound. The department was really in ashes at that time. We helped to turn it around. But what we need to do is go much further now.
I see what you meant there. You meant that the likes of Kemi Badenoch and indeed James Cleverly sort of stayed on, even though you felt that you weren't honouring your manifesto commitments.
Well, people should know about me. I have a very clear view now on where the country needs to go. And I will act on principle, as I did when I resigned from Cabinet, to try to deliver that. Because I think politics itself has changed in recent years. It has been clear to me for some time that our system is not working and that the public are yearning for politicians who do take a stand, who act on principle, who set out the hard truths, explain the trade-offs to the public, and then put forward serious, credible answers to that. I do not see that coming from the Labour Party. I don't think that Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, Ed Miliband are going to take these difficult challenges and provide the credible solution. So it falls to people like myself to do that.
How would you handle a problem like Nigel Farage?
Look, I want the Conservative Party to be the natural home for all small C Conservatives. Reform is a symptom, not a cause. It has arisen because the Conservative Party did not keep its promises on immigration. So I will adopt very clear positions, as I have been arguing now for months, if not years, on immigration, legal and illegal, on extremism, on crime, on the issues that are of concern to Reform voters, and I will bring those voters back home to the Conservative Party. That is my mission. It is not about inviting Nigel Farage or indeed anybody else into the Conservative Party. It's bringing back all of those voters home to the Conservative Party.
Your people are doing, we need to wrap up signals, so I want to ask you some policy questions, but they're going to have to be answered in a quick-fire fashion, if you don't mind. Which tax would you cut first?
Well, I don't think it's responsible 4 or 5 years out for me to be determining the taxes that should or shouldn't
Okay,
rise.
which tax
I think
annoys you the most and you think should be reduced?
Well, I would like to see the income tax thresholds rising again with inflation, because that is dragging far too many people, particularly people on lower incomes and pensioners,
All right,
into
unfreeze tax
higher
bands.
tax rates.
Housing, the target has currently been set at 300,000 by Labour. Is that high enough, or would you make it higher?
I think that's about the right level, but only if we tackle the demand side, which is reducing the number of people coming into our country legally. Otherwise, you'd have to be building a new home every 5 minutes, night and day,
Okay.
365 days a year, just to build enough homes
All right.
for those people coming into
And
our
on
country.
social care, would you implement the Dill Knot recommendations, which is putting a cap on social care, which seems to have been abandoned by the Conservatives as a topic?
I think we'd have to think carefully about that, because I don't want to create any new costs
All right.
to the state.
Policy quickfire round over. We want a fun quickfire round, please. We ask all leadership candidates these questions. Think as quickly as you can. What's the last novel you read? Novel, not non-fiction.
Oh, what have I just been reading? Well, I've just been reading all of the Harry Potter books with my daughters, so I'm an absolute expert on all things Harry Potter.
Which film have you watched more than any other?
Oh, what films have I been watching
Well, one that you might have watched repeatedly since childhood.
since childhood?
Yes. What film is the one film you've watched probably more than any other? Like for me, it's Back to the Future. I don't mind admitting that.
Is it Back to the Future?
Yeah. Or Jaws.
I've watched that a few times, yeah. Great Escape is one of my favourite films, every Christmas.
What are you binge watching at the moment?
Lots of box sets that we watch in our family. Succession, I was a late adopter to that, but we've just watched all of that.
Okay, what was your first car?
Oh, I used to drive my mum's Rover Kensington, I think it was called, which was not a very cool car for a 18-year-old.
What's your McDonald's order?
Oh, Big Mac meal.
Which drink?
Well, Diet Coke, I think.
Yeah,
Or
okay.
a milkshake.
This is also highbrow. Favourite crisp?
Prawn cocktail.
Walkers,
Definitely.
not Skips. It's just
I
they're-
quite like Skips.
How good!
Yeah,
It's very
I'm-
popular with Georgia in our
I quite like
production
Skips.
team.
Yeah, they're in my kids' packed lunches.
What's your worst habit?
Not getting enough exercise. Eating too much.
You've lost so much weight lately.
Yeah, no, you're
How have
well,
you
that's
done
well.
that?
I've spent
Tailoring. It's all
the last
tailoring.
year trying to change the habit of a lifetime.
Did you smoke dope at university?
No.
Ecstasy? Crack?
Tim, this isn't on the
No,
list.
okay, fine. No, it's not on the list.
She's
He's
wearing-
diverted. He's diverted.
I know, he's speaking about himself. I
Yeah,
think.
probably. Favourite hobby?
Probably watching TV, going for walks with my kids.
Yeah.
First holiday without parents?
To which destination?
Oh, my first one. Well, I went backpacking around India when I was 18.
You're so cultured.
that's
I thought you were
quite
going to say
brave.
Falaraki.
Something about you that people don't know.
I'm a trained auctioneer.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Okay.
Yeah, so I've
What,
conducted
like with the
auctions.
hammer and everything?
Yeah, gavel.
The gavel.
Yeah.
Sorry, of course,
Not a
I said
hammer.
gavel. I beg
Okay.
your- I haven't been watching my bargain hunt or whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
Would you prefer to have a pint with Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak?
Well, Rishi is teetotal, so that
Yeah.
really wouldn't work.
We need to
so
change that one.
He could have a pint of
drink.
Coke.
A drink with. I'd have a drink with Boris anytime.
Yeah.
Well, who is your closest friend in politics?
Well, my longest standing friend is in fact Suella. Because I met.
Are you still friends?
We're still friends, of course we are. Yeah, I met.
Even though
I
you've
met
nicked a
Suella
load
when
of
I
her
was
supporters.
18 years old.
At Cambridge.
That's right. Yeah. She'd
What-
just come back from a year in France and was a Europhile at that time. But
So you had a few debates.
she's been on a journey.
She's
as
been
well.
on a journey.
She's been on a
too.
journey.
Okay.
What's the last song you listened to on your phone?
Oh, Taylor Swift is all of my kids are massive Taylor Swift fans. So
Which album do you like? Or could you not name?
Well, we're not fans of her latest album.
Do you like Taylor Swift too?
I've never listened. I couldn't tell you what
You're
he
not.
sung.
You're not a
I have
Swiftie,
no
Tim.
idea.
I'm surprised.
No, I'm not a fan. I think all modern music's noise.
Okay, your people now are literally heading to the
Yes,
station
they've
ahead
left
of
without you.
Thank you so much, Robert
Well,
Jenrick.
it's been a pleasure.
Good
Thank you for
luck
having
in
me.
this leadership race, and thank you very much for joining us on the Daily Tea.
Thanks very much.
Interesting, isn't it, Robert Jenrick? I'm going to make an observation that he's got very dreamy brown eyes. And by the way, I'm not saying that I fancy him or anything. I really don't.
Yeah.
But he's looking very neat and tidy.
Good skin, but quite dry hands.
What? I
Thought the hands were a little dry. He
Were they?
could do to use some hand cream on some
Okay.
Nivea on there. But
Do you know what? This is how he's positioning himself. The Tory public wants this, Tim. They want the politics of Nigel Farage
Yeah.
with the presentation of David Cameron.
I think that's correct.
And that's what Robert Jenrick's trying to be.
And by implication, what went wrong for the last 14 years is they got the presentation of Nigel Farage saying we're going to cut immigration.
Yeah.
But they got the actual delivery of David Cameron with
Yes.
immigration going up.
Oh my God, we've solved it.
So he's
Why
very...
aren't we running? We have got the answers to these questions. I think the country has suffered enough, but sorry. you were
Whoever
gonna say something.
wins is going to have to repudiate, but in a polite way. And so he is the candidate, the repudiation of the last 14 years, but he's doing it in a relatively polite way, so people don't feel that
Yeah.
that it's a complete repudiation, that it's chaotic. He's good friends with Suella Braverman. They really like each other. They have shared political history. That they were also at Cambridge together. He mentioned he knew her when he was at Cambridge and that she had been to Europe and came back a Europhile and a Remainer, which is so funny. But the truth is, he's taking her torch. Right, she identified that the party needs to be more Faragiste in policy. He's taking that torch, but he's doing something different with it presentationally. And a lot of her supporters have bolted to him, and I think it's because they feel Suella's great, but she's not. She's a kind of chaos candidate.
Yeah. So do we look at him and we say, ooh, I quite like what he's saying because I'm on the right and he's not making me feel as uncomfortable
Yes.
as if Suella said it or Pretty says it or Farage says it
Yeah.
or even to an extent maybe Badenoch says it because they're all quite abrasive.
Possibly, and I think the riots play to his advantage because Conservatives right now, they feel these riots have been caused by policy failures, but they also hate the riots. So they want to go so far in talking about immigration, but they also want to feel I'm obviously not in favour of disorder, that I'm also going to support a candidate of law and order. So I think he's actually very well positioned to say that because he's all about immigration.
Is this guy ending up in the final two?
I don't know because I still feel it's going to be Kemi versus Tom. I still feel
Tugendhat.
I think it's going to be Tugendhat, and we will be talking to him, of course.
We are. So he's going to be coming in on Thursday and we're going to do that as the Friday podcast,
But I
which
think
will be fascinating.
I think he's a well packaged candidate who I think if he were put to the members would warm to. He is a classic Conservative candidate, offering a lot of them what they want right now.
We shall send him some hand cream. Yeah. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. And yes, Tom Tugendhat. You know, it's Tugendhat.
Oh, this is like Kamala versus Kamala,
Yeah,
isn't
well,
it?
sorry to name drop, but I did ask him personally, and he did WhatsApp me with the pronunciation.
Right.
Oh, I've managed to say pronunciation, which I couldn't say yesterday. So we'll be back tomorrow at 5, and then, wait for the next leadership candidate to drop in your daily tea inbox on Friday.